GOG is to me one of the most important initiatives in video games history. Technology grows so fast and advances so much. We're always on the lookout for the next technological breakthrough, Unreal Engine presenting the meta-human program ever more developed, and the creation of incredibly like-life human characters, more and more realistic animations, visual effects, all of that. Amazing. But I'm fascinated about the history of video games, back from the start. Where we came from as a medium. What were the drivers of designers and developers in the old days, when even the definitions and roles of each person in a team were super blurry? We didn't even know how to call things in those times. As the saying goes, we were learning how to craft an airplane while free falling. When creativity was sparkling, surrounded by nothing but technical limitations. Everything was a limitation, but at the same time, every small thing was a breakthrough. It was like Walt Disney in the 1930s adding sound and color to Mickey, adding parallax and all of the visual effects that today we take for granted, but that were really revolutions, every single one of them. And that was the history of video games in the 1970s and 80s. The desire of designers and storytellers to tell interesting stories to the players, one pixel at a time. Because back in the day, that was pretty much what was possible. Computers had extremely limited firepower to process graphics on a screen. We're talking about the Apple II, Commodore 64, the Amiga 500, the Macintosh, and many more. Games weren't 100 gigabytes in size like they are today. No, Donkey Kong from 1981 took up an astonishing 24 kilobytes in memory, while Nintendo's 1985 Super Mario Bros. Was 40 kilobytes in memory. But each moving pixel was a piece of art. The famous level 1-1 from Super Mario Bros., the platform game that revolutionized the whole industry, that level continues to be a benchmark in player experience and good level design until this day. Every new game designer will study the level of Shigeru Miyamoto-san, the legendary designer from Nintendo, 40 years after the release of the original game. 40 years after, and it's still an incredible challenge to replicate that same clever and smooth design in modern games, no matter how much technology evolves. It is no coincidence that so many remarkable games emerged during times with so many technical constraints. In design, we learned that constraints drive creativity, and the old days were all about that. Hey guys, it's Harry. I've been a game designer and producer for the past 10 years. And in this video, we're going to talk about what I truly believe to be one of the most important topics we can discuss. It is so easy to get lost in the flood of new game releases every day on so many different platforms, with all of the imaginable genres and mechanics. And it's great to see games have come so far as a medium. But it's also very easy to forget where we came from. Experiences that completely hooked us as kids and teenagers. Games that for some reason stuck with us for years and decades. I remember getting emotional playing Final Fantasy Tactics on my PlayStation 1 with such incredible story and characters. Or feeling an adrenaline rush trying to play stealth in Metal Gear Solid. Or playing too many Castlevania games that never got boring no matter how many times I impersonated Richter Belmont or Alucard. We developers spend our entire careers trying to create those memorable moments for players. And as gamers, we always hope that the next game will bring us those gameplay moments that we'll remember forever. And the history of video games is full of those classic games, those beloved franchises that we spent our childhood playing and we want our kids and grandkids to play. I don't know, it might be the old gamer in me, but sometimes I do feel that the games from earlier times had a bit more heart than most games these days. Not to say that you don't find incredible experiences in modern games, you definitely do, but the sheer amount of great games from back in the day seems absolutely astonishing, while today, with a much more crowded market, you see most games just following recipes and trying to emulate past successes from other games and companies. But for those old gems, GOG with the preservation program does a remarkable job of preserving video games history. You might not realize, but so many games from the 70s, 80s, 90s and more get lost because the publishers have no incentive to continue offering those games. Licenses get lost, old companies have already been shut down, and it becomes a Herculean job to hunt down all of the bits and pieces required to preserve an old game. This is a whole discussion that we can do. I mean, couldn't game publishers like EA or Microsoft do more to preserve their own classic games? They definitely could. But unfortunately, that's no small feat. Imagine a whole catalog of old EA, Microsoft, and Sony games that have to be maintained over the years, updated for each new platform to guarantee backwards compatibility, online servers to be kept alive. It's a big task. We have seen some news about that recently, like Microsoft working to bring Xbox legacy games to modern devices, but all in all, a lot of classic games still get lost. Like the games from Sierra Online, one of the most popular publishers of adventure games from the 80s and 90s. Games like King's Quest and Phantasmagoria, classic point-and-click style games full of narrative and personality. Sierra merged with Vivendi and Activision and was terminated in 2008, with most of their games lost in time. And like we said, there are various reasons for different games to get lost. Games from a known IP like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Marvel, and others have license contracts that do expire after a while, and you would have to renew the contract and deal with all of the accompanying bureaucracy. And if we're talking about games and IPs that are 30, 40, 50 years old or more, contracts can become very tricky very fast. Music is also something that can become an impediment to game releases and preservation throughout the years. You would initially not think that a song would be a big problem for game development, but when you're talking about copyrights and licenses, everything becomes a factor. Grand Theft Auto Vice City was released in 2002, but it was removed from Steam in 2012 because of licensing issues for Michael Jackson's song Wanna Be Starting Something. It returned to Steam after the developers adjusted the game, but Michael Jackson's track was removed from it, along with many other original soundtracks that got removed from the definitive edition of the GTA trilogy. Another reason why it's difficult or impossible to preserve many of the older games is due to the lack of technical documentation and source files. Believe it or not, I can tell you by experience that even today, a lot of teams don't do proper pass on technical documentation and source file management for their projects. That even makes it harder to port a game to another platform, a modern one. So you think that back in the day companies were super organized with their files to make sure everything is tidy, just in case somebody 30 years later wants to preserve their game? Not a chance, not gonna happen. The 90s and the 2000s saw an explosion in MMORPGs, a super popular genre at the time. Another huge challenge with online games is that in order to preserve the actual game experience of those games like EverQuest and World of Warcraft, you need to maintain the original servers active. And needless to say that requires a lot of resources and time. And even if you try to recreate servers instead of preserving the old ones, that's still a massive endeavor. And I mean, even if all of the above is sorted out, most of the time selling older titles doesn't pay off financially, let's be honest. When people say that nostalgia is a big thing and it sells a lot, they're talking about the shiny new remakes. They're talking about the 2023 version of Resident Evil 4, not the 2005 original release. So you can really feel that preserving an incredible amount of good old games is a passion project for the GOG team, and we should all be thankful for it. Because as we can see, nostalgia sells well when it's cool and modern, not exactly when it's the old games that the new generations don't even know how to play. Definitely simpler times, when we didn't have a crazy amount of games releasing on the same day on Steam or any other storefront. No, back in the day you had that one new game and that's it, good luck. That's what you get for a whole month or several months depending on how accessible games were in your country. Here in Brazil, for example, games were really not that accessible and quite expensive. Piracy was the most viable option for you to get more than one or two games if we're being honest. And oh boy do I remember those classic magazines like PC Games or the PlayStation Magazine, where we knew all about the latest releases and cheat codes and walkthroughs and everything in between. That was really the main way that we had to know more about the games, some behind scenes, tips and tricks, curiosities, and to feel more connected with the community. There was no broadband internet connection. For most things, there were no forums, no YouTube, no nothing. It was a much more analog world. GOG also does something remarkable in the way that they approach selling games. The games are DRM-free, meaning that you don't need to install their platform, their client, to play the games, like Steam does. and truly the game files become yours. I mean, in the unlikely scenario Steam falls apart and is discontinued, you don't own any of the games you have in your library. You would lose it all, and I'm not sure how Steam would deal with that. But GOG is very transparent in offering you a DRM-free version, meaning no link between the game files and the launcher that they have. You know, we're all mostly fine with Steam and it's a great platform, but it's cool to know there are alternatives. And for GOG with the good old games, they also provide something very cool, the original manuals and materials that came with the games back in the day. That sounds crazy today, but games in the 80s and 90s came with manuals for you to read, with instructions on how to install the game, how to play it, tips and tricks, an overview of the narrative and game world. That was really the main way that the developers had to onboard players onto their games. Even digital versions like the ones you get on GOG. Reading those manuals feels like going back in time to explore the depths of history. It's like getting ready to participate in a classic novel with you as the main character. Nowadays, the GOG website also focuses on offering the most recent games to compete more with Steam, but the heart of the company and the program is still the preservation of the classic games, and something that they are pretty much the only ones officially doing it. Of course, we should also take into account a whole community of game emulators and mods that you can find all across the internet, which is also a big part of game preservation in a way, even though it's most of the time not an official path for preservation, but that will be the only way you can still play many games out there. So I say that again, that GOG is one of the most important initiatives in gaming, but preserving the software is just part of the work. The Video Game History Foundation does a remarkable job in preserving many other facets of gaming history, with the US's first dedicated library for the study of video game history. It's a nerdy paradise with lots and lots of magazines and different publications going back to the 1970s. And they have other incredible projects like preserving the source code and raw materials of games, behind-scenes footage, old interviews. There's a lot of stuff there. And they also produce podcasts and educational material. So please go check it out at gamehistory.org, and if you can, support this incredible initiative. And that is definitely something crucial for all of us to do. That is to support more of these projects. And not just that, but to talk more about them on social media and online forums, and to request more of that from big companies. It's never going to be quite enough, but the more the big publishers see the interest in their old games and the preservation of game history, the more it'll make financial sense for them to go back and add support and infrastructure to preserve the discontinued titles. So yeah, that's a lot, and I think we should continue to discuss the preservation of the history of video games. As time goes on, it'll be increasingly difficult to go back in time and support games from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And on the topic of talking about classic games, I have been thinking of creating a series here on the channel covering the history of some classic titles and franchises. So let me know here in the comments which of those favorite game series you would like to see covered here. Zelda, Doom, Castlevania, Final Fantasy, Command & Conquer. There are so many incredible things for us to talk about, and I can't wait to start. That's it guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for sticking around. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and I'll catch you guys next time.